EP Magazine presents Layla Tamimi and her uplifting story, from suffering a debilitating paralysis and stroke to graduating this past January with honors from Montclair State University. In addition, we focus on vision, hearing, speech, and how these impact the development and education of people with special needs. Read it today at www.epmagazine.com.
Oscar Mike Radio is a proud podcast partner of Reach Across America Radio, heard every Thursday at 11 a.m. and Sunday at 8 a.m. Eastern. They're also big supporters of the nonprofit I Got Your Six, Two Lives at Once. And with every wreath you sponsor through Oscar Mike Radio, $5 goes back to this great organization dedicated to making a difference in the lives of veterans, law enforcement, firefighters, and first responders battling PTSD. Two Lives at Once pairs these brave men and women together with dogs rescued from kill shelters. In this way, two lives are saved at the same time by saving each other. Donate now. Go to reachacrossamerica.org/Oscar Mike Radio to help. That's reachacrossamerica.org/Oscar Mike Radio.
Suicide is preventable, and each of us has a role to play in suicide prevention.
Suicide is complex. There is no single cause.
And it's not always a mental health issue. It could be loss of a job or home, financial or relationship issues, pain, or leaving the military.
Suicide does not discriminate. It affects all ages, races, and genders, veterans or not.
If you know a veteran who is struggling, connect with them. Let them know help is available.
There is quick and easy access to services in times of crisis.
Dial 988, then press 1. Talking about it is okay.
Don't keep it inside. Don't be ashamed. Don't wait. Reach out.
Find resources at va.gov/reach.
Hello and welcome again to Oscar Mike Radio. My name is Travis. I'm a Marine Corps veteran and your host. Oscar Mike Radio is part of the Hubazoo Network. You can find out more on hubazoo.com. I want to thank my sponsors, Joyce Asek of Asek Real Estate, Army National Guard veteran Mark Holmes of Reapers Detailing and Power Washing, and my supporters, Cason Shaving Company, Exceptional Parent Magazine, and Black Cat Designs. When this show drops, it'll be almost 8 years ago to the day that I said I'm going to try doing this thing called podcasting. And it has enriched my life. I've gotten to meet some really amazing people. And in a way, they've shared their stories with me on a very intimate level. And today is no different. I am just humbled, honored, pleased, and excited all at the same time to introduce Yvette Benavidez Garcia, who is the daughter of Medal of Honor recipient Roy Benavidez, to Oscar Mike Radio. Yvette, thank you.
Hi, thank you for having me. I appreciate that.
I have talked to a lot of people in the military community. I've talked to veterans, parents, but very rarely in my, almost 400 shows, I've talked to children of people who've served. So it is really an experience to talk to Roy's daughter, Yvette. Yvette, just welcome, and I am looking forward to getting to hear your perspective on your father's service. How are you doing? And thank you.
I'm doing very well, thank you. And I feel like I'm an expert on my dad. So I have that right. And I love sharing my dad's story and especially his legacy. So anytime that I have an opportunity to talk to people and to help them to be encouraged and inspired by him, I'm going to take people up on that offer. So thank you for asking me to be here. It is truly my pleasure.
Well, you wrote the book, Tango Mike Mike. We'll get into that. But before we even get there, being a daughter really is different than being a son, isn't it?
Probably, yes.
Well,
My dad was probably a little bit more strict with my brother. My mom and dad have 3 children. I am the middle child, and I proudly hold that honor. And being one of 2 daughters, yeah, I think our relationship with our dad was, with your dads are very special and bonding, and ours was no different.
so you got to see several different sides of your father that, we didn't get to see, but experience it as a daughter. Um, let's just start with the beginning. What was it like growing up with, your father in this way?
We get that question asked a lot, and I think a lot of people expect our answer to be that he was very strict and very stern and very mean and militaristic, which by all means he was a portion of that, tiny portion. My dad, and perhaps it was the time era that we were growing up in, but both of my parents, you know, they encouraged us to be respectful, obviously, and none of us wanted to embarrass or do anything wrong that would make our father, I guess, just not proud of us. And so that was what we grew up with. We tried to stay on the straight and narrow path. That's not to say that we didn't do things that were, that were wrong, because we were kids. But my dad was strict in the sense that he expected us to do certain things a certain way. Like if we didn't eat all of our food for dinner, he was really like strict, like most parents are. He'd come up with, do you know how many starving children there are? And I've been to places where kids are starving, and you really need to eat that. And so he had certain expectations, but I think the expectations are the same that most parents today have. He was very intimidating to guys that we brought over to the house, or my brother had maybe a girlfriend or something that was, maybe they might felt intimidated. But mostly for me and my sister, I think the guys were very intimidated by him because he was very stout and stern and stoic looking. But behind their backs, my dad could just shoot a grin or roll his eyes, or I think he loved to make people like boys that we brought over feel intimidated, but he really was like just a big teddy bear. But my dad was very kind-hearted, very generous with his time and with any kind of money that he did have. He was always giving to the poor or the needy. He literally would go and buy, space heaters for people who needed it during the Christmas season. He was very funny and witty and a jokester, and loved to just make people laugh with the kind of crazy food concoctions that he would put together. And I'm like, literally, like if he got a bowl of ice cream, he would add so much silly things to it just to get the rise out of your reaction to it. But yeah, he was funny and witty and very intelligent, very smart. Even though he had an 8th grade education, he was constantly reading. I always saw him reading books. He loved John Grisham books, and he would read self-help books sometimes. If he met somebody out when he was talking, and if an author gave him his book, he'd bring it home and he'd read it. So he was always trying to gain expertise and knowledge in anything, and always watching news programs and things like that.
So, because I don't want to assume, and I'm not really sure, Did you grow up as a military child through part of your life with him before he left the Army, or was he out of the Army completely when, before he had you?
Well, I was not born when he was active duty.
Okay.
He retired, I guess, 5 years after I was born. So my parents had me at Fort Riley, Kansas. And then after we lived there for about 4 or 5 years, then they decided to come back to San Antonio and retire. So he retired at Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio. And then after his retirement there, they moved to El Campo, Texas, which is where we currently live now. And he raised all of the kids there, and we went to school there.
So when did you begin to understand his military service and what that entailed as a daughter growing up?
It probably didn't fully come to recognition in my mind until um, after, you know, I became an adult and moved away and came back. And just like after his death, it really impacted me, I guess, what he literally meant to people and to the world. But, growing up as his daughter, my dad, obviously we knew that he was in the military. I knew that he was in the Army. I remember living on base at Fort Sam and seeing him get up early in the morning and doing the calisthenics and the exercises and things like that. I remember bits and pieces of things in that manner, but him and the May 2nd, 1968 mission, I probably didn't fully understand and grasp it until he received the medal. Because when he received the medal, the Secret Service had to come down to our hometown a week prior, and they had to, we had meetings with them because the whole Benavidez family was flying up there, and they needed to make sure that we knew about the agenda. And they drove us to school, and my mom says that they tapped our phones. They were listening in on our phone conversations, but whether or not that was true, I don't know. But they were very intrusive, and my mom did not like it. I know they drove us to school for like a whole week, and it was very hardcore. But it was things like that you kind of step back and go, why is all this going on? Like, what did you do? And then because my dad never talked about it, he never talked.
So
Mhm.
he never talked about his service or what this is all about with you at all.
Not much, no.
Wow.
And we never asked. And I think in retrospect, he never talked about it because I think the post-traumatic stress that he was going through on a daily basis was just too much. And so he was very protective, and I respect that. As an adult, I respect the fact that he didn't go into it. He didn't bring it up. He didn't constantly talk about it. I respect that. I really do. And I guess it's because of the little research that I have done on post-traumatic stress disorder. It would have been too torturous for him, and don't get me wrong, he would bring it up when he spoke to the hundreds, if not thousands of people when he traveled the circuit. He talked about it then, but it was torture for him to do that. He did it because he felt like he was helping others to combat their demons and to help and to inspire other people. That's why he did it. But I know, if he wasn't asked to do it, he probably would not have done that.
So just to go back a little bit, I mean, your father suffered grievous injuries in Vietnam, and then
He did.
recovered from those injuries when the doctors told him you probably wouldn't walk again, and then went back and served and got,
Again.
yeah.
Mhm.
And so what you're saying is not only was there the physical cost to his body, he carried, the internal part of it with him.
Emotional,
Yeah.
yes, emotional and mental. Yeah. And I never would have, I didn't see it. I didn't know it. And let me give you an example of that.
Sure.
This is all in retrospect. This is all after my father passed, and I started just kind of having my own recollections of things and people asking me. But, my father we lived in a house, and he had these windows installed where you could look out, but you couldn't see in. And, when we had these installed, it meant nothing. It's like, oh, why are we doing that? And for him, it was like, I guess he always had a really good reason as to why he did what he did. And so at that time, his excuse was, oh, we'll save on electrical cost. It'll help us in that aspect. But when I really stopped to think about it and the other things that I would see, I think he was protecting him, not only us, but himself. And I really think he would have these flashbacks of not wanting people to see inside the house. He wanted that privacy, that protection, because he was probably paranoid of, quote unquote, the enemy. You know what I'm saying? Being in the jungles of Vietnam and always being scared of, if you turn your back, or the things that he knew and saw. I think that was his type of protection from that. He would always, in the back of the house, would stand at the windows, and kind of the drapes would be drawn, the curtains would be drawn. He never wanted them to be open. And I'm the type of person who, even now, I like my blinds to be open. I like the natural sunlight to come through. But for him, he always wanted them closed. And so I'd go and open them, and then they'd be closed. I'd go and open them, they'd be closed. And he'd ask, who keeps doing this? And why are you doing that? And that was, again, his way of, I think, not wanting people. He didn't want to see what was out there, and he didn't want people to see coming in. If you never dared come up from behind and tap him on the shoulder or try to scare him, like kids like to do. Kids like to go up to their parents and go, boo. You didn't do that to him, because he would freak out. And the times that we did do it, because we didn't know any better, he would freak out. You know what I'm saying? It wasn't like a normal parent being upset or like, oh, you scared me. It was like, oh my gosh, what did I just do? If we went to restaurants, which we hardly did, but if we went to restaurants and the waiter would drop a plate, or somebody would slam a door, he was always on guard, always like looking over his shoulder with that like startledness look. So it's all these little things that, as an adult, I started putting two and two together, and I thought, my dad was probably living in fear, but we never knew. He protected us from that. He didn't want us to know of this torture that he was living probably on a daily life. And that's my take on it. That's what I remember and what I get out. My brother and sister might have a different feel for that, but this is what I truly believe.
Is this what led you to start putting this together to write the book, Tango Mike Mike?
In some form or fashion, yes. At the time, I was teaching fourth grade, and I taught ELA, English Language Arts, and I taught social studies. And my students, always would, when you live in a small town, they know who your parents are, they know who you are. So a lot of kids knew that my dad was Roy Benavidez, and they, during Veterans Day and or Memorial Day, all those major holidays where people want to respect and honor our military men and women, they would always ask me, is there a book written about your dad? How can we learn more about him? And by that time, the three books that had been written, they had a little bit of language in them. My dad always went, although he co-authored them, he never wanted those books to have any kind of bad language at all. And mind you, bad words in our house were damn, hell, shut up, stupid. Those were the bad words. And so he didn't even want those types of words in any of the books that he wrote. But when you go with publishers, big publishers, mind you, they're going to write whatever, they want to put that in there because it sells. So my dad really didn't have a say. So he was not proud of the fact that the words in some of these books were inappropriate, because he wanted school kids to read it. So I never felt comfortable referring those books to these kids who are fourth graders, because I knew they had language in them. And so I would tell them, well, he has 3 books written that he co-authored, but you'll have to ask your parents if you can read them, blah, blah, blah. And then there were a little bit of things on social media that you could see. And so I was just like, I'm going to write a book. Mind you, I had already done that because I attended a New Jersey writing seminar for 2 weeks, one year, and we were encouraged to write. And so at that time, I wrote an expository piece on my dad, and I wrote a children's book on my dad. But I never got them published. The expository piece I did with Hispanic Magazine, but my book I never got published. And so it kind of sat. And when they started questioning and asking me, I always said, yeah, one day I'll write a book. And then one day I was in the kitchen and my son and daughter were like, Mom, you keep saying you're going to write a book on Grandpa. When are you going to do that? And at that moment,
Mom,
at that moment, I went and sat down and I wrote Tango Mike Mike, which obviously comes easy to me because I'm my dad's daughter and I'm an expert at his life and his story. But what was hard was trying to figure out whether or not I wanted to go the traditional route of publishing and or self-publishing. And so I did try to present it to a publisher, and they turned me down and said, "Oh, I'll take it, but I'm not taking any new ones right now." So they were going to let it basically sit on their desk for whenever they got ready. And I said, "Nope, that's okay. I'll go self-publish it myself." So I did. And the rest is history. So it's called Tango Mike Mike, the story of Master Sergeant Roy P. Benavidez.
Now, for those who don't know what Tango Mike Mike means in military speak, I thought that was a very appropriate title, that the way you worked that in there, because certainly what your father went through represents completely what that phrase is all about.
Yeah, so Tango Mike Mike is his call sign, his military call sign, and it was a name given to him. It translates to that mean Mexican, and a lot of kids, they can relate to call signs just because they play video games. And video games, you never want to put your real name out there, because especially in the military world, because they don't want to hear you say, "Hey, Roy Benavidez, where are you?"
Right.
So it was Tango Mike Mike. That was his call sign. So, but yeah, I wrote it with the intention of school-aged kids reading it. More importantly, because as an educator, I understand that a lot of our students struggle with reading. They don't want to read. They can't read, much less pick up a 200-300 page book and have to read through that. So I wanted to do a book that would be sweet, short, simple, to the point, that people of any age, really, because it is for the young at heart as well. Adults like to read children's books, but I wanted it to just be straight and to the point, especially for those school-age kids who need someone to be encouraged and inspired by. So here's the book. I don't know if you can see it or if it's blurry.
Really interesting about the way you approach this, because your father was a real proponent of education and telling, children to stay in school and to study hard. So, I think that's really cool that you're an educator now and kind of keeping that part of his legacy alive.
Yeah, and it's really surreal because of that aspect, what you just said. My dad lived in a time era where he wasn't allowed, I guess, to get an education like you and I are able to, because he had to work out in the fields, literally, to help his family, his adopted family, earn a living. And so he would probably wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning, go out into the fields, pick cotton, and then walk back to school and try to make it there by 7:30 to attend class. And then after school, go back out into the fields and continue to help pick cotton, and then start over again the next day. And so I think it got to a point where my dad just wasn't learning. He was too tired when he got to school. He wasn't, and we see that as an educator. I see that all the time. For whatever reason, kids are tired, whether it be because they stayed up purposefully playing playing video games or being on social media, or because they live in an abusive household and their parents are fighting, or whatever the situation is. We don't truly know why kids are tired and why kids aren't learning, but we can only assume that it's social media, but sometimes it's not that. So my dad, as an educator, I see so many kids in my dad. Like, I see my dad in them all the time, because my dad was that kid who couldn't get an education, had to work for a living, had to drop out. He was called dumb and stupid. I'm sure teachers were looking at him because he wasn't learning. He was always tired. He wanted to sleep all the time. He wasn't grasping what was being taught. If you looked at him weird or funny, he wanted to fight you. Why did he want to fight you? Probably because you had a better life than him, and you had a mom and dad, and his mom and dad were dead. He was an orphan. He was adopted by somebody else. He didn't have that dynamics that most people, are fortunate enough to grow into. And so, he was having to make tacos for breakfast, and where other kids, are eating their sandwiches and things that, aren't offensive sometimes. You know what I mean? Like, kids
Right.
get embarrassed by the things that they have to eat, or the shoes that he wore had holes in them, and other kids, obviously had better clothes than him. So, my dad was just living that school life that he just didn't want to go anymore. What was the point? He'd probably be better off working. And so and these are his words, not mine, but he says, like a fool, he dropped out of school. And that was the biggest regret that he ever could make. So when he spoke to school-aged kids and those who, and the adults of the world who have children who are like my father, he wanted to let them know that dropping out is not the best decision that you should probably make, and just never give up. And that's the theme of my book, is never give up, because by all accounts, he should have given up. And I think the whole world gave up on him, and he didn't. He had a mentor later in life who encouraged him. He ended up joining the military, and we all know where that took him, but he never, ever gave up in any circumstance, whichever was given to him. He never gave up.
One of the things that, I'm reading the Medal of Honor citation, and I'm going to try to run it at the end of our conversation. And then, looking through your book, and the book is Tango Mike Mike. I'll have the links in the Oscar Mike Radio show post where you can find it on Amazon. Is, you have people in this country who know what their favorite sports figure has done, their entire career. You have people that can, sing every word of a song from a famous, you know, rock star, pop star, whatever you want to call it, rap, whatever. But people don't really understand what this kind of sacrifice at this level means. And if they do see it, sometimes they turn away from that. And I'm just curious, as a daughter who, you obviously love your father.
Mhm.
What's that do to you when you see people getting accolades for things that, compared to your father, are, for lack of a better term, inconsequential?
Yeah, it's very disheartening, because I feel like we do put certain types of jobs and athletics ahead of what our men and women in our country did and the sacrifices that were made. It's disheartening because I'm a part of that family. I'm a part of that circle. And, athletes, for example, the amount of money, and or rock stars, musicians, the amount of money that we pay to go see these people, or to pay them, and that they're earning, and rightfully so. They're talented. This is their craft. This is their way of life. This is how they make a living. I don't want to, take that away from them, and I don't want to belittle that, but it's the way society, perpetuates it. Why can't we pay our men and women who go out in combat the same amount that they pay these athletes who go out and, perform and go out and play. Why can't we do the same for the men and women who go out and risk their lives and their mental fortitude for our country? I mean, like, it's, most of these men and women who come back are on welfare or homeless. They can't find a job afterwards, and it's not maybe because they don't want to, it's because mentally they can't. I mean, when you live with somebody who's gone to combat and the things that they've been through and what they've seen, there's no way we can expect them to come back and live a normal life with somebody like us if we don't have mental issues. We can't expect them to go and work a 9-to-5 job and be present mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and physically, but yet we expect that from them. And so it's just disheartening. It's disheartening. It's disheartening when I see people who, even in the classroom, who do not stand for our flag and pledge their allegiance, or at a parade when people are talking and are on their phone, because every flag leads the parade. Yeah. And people can't even stop for a second to not even for a second to respect and honor the flag that is being walked by or driven or carried by. I mean, it's really sad. But we as educators have to get the word out, and we have to share stories, and we have to be vocal about it, and we have to speak up. We have to say things so that we can change the culture.
One of the things that comes to mind is you live seeing your father, go through a lot of this. How did it affect you? You kind of talked about a little bit, that you didn't know what was going on. Right. Some of the things that he did that you just didn't understand what was going on at the time. But did that have any long-term effect on you into adulthood? Or was it you got to adulthood and were able to reconcile what he had went through and then come to peace with it?
No, I mean, I think for me, it's still a daily struggle for me to, remember the little things that I saw my dad go through. Both of my parents didn't have a mean, even though my dad is this American icon for his combat. He, in the personal sense at home, they didn't have any kind of ill will or mean words that ever crossed their mouths. And believe me, when my dad came back from the war and he had to live with the wounds of war that he had, he couldn't hold a 9-to-5 job. He was at the time he was 80% diagnosed with 80% disability, but then later was deemed 100% disabled. But people didn't recognize or want to see that as a disability, because on the outside, my dad didn't look or show that he was disabled. In other words, he could still walk. He didn't have to walk with a cane, or he wasn't in a wheelchair. He could still walk. But what they didn't see was that my dad struggled to get out of bed. What they didn't see was that my dad's muscles would tense up even with the weather. If we had cold weather or any type of weather change, my dad was really struggling. My dad had to walk 5 miles every day. He did that by choice so that his muscles wouldn't tense up and he wouldn't just freeze up. My dad had severe pain in his abdomen, in his arms and legs, neuropathy. My dad had pieces of shrapnel that was making its way out of his body on a daily basis. I mean, people didn't see. I sat behind him in our car. I had my spot behind him, and blood would be dripping sometimes. I could see blood coming out of his head, and I'd say, "Dad, you're bleeding. What is that?" And it was a piece of shrapnel that was making its way out. My dad walked with a limp initially, and then of course once he'd get going, you may not have noticed it as much, but people think that because you're not in a wheelchair or you don't have a limb missing, that, oh, he's okay, he can go to work. And so when he did come back and fought for disability like he should have, not only for himself but other veterans that were out there, some of our neighbors were very mean and very cruel and heartless with their words. And anytime the media had something in the paper about my dad, they were really quick to write letters to the editor and say, well, I see him getting up every day and I see him walking at the park and I see him driving his car. And, it was just so sad. And by all means, my dad had every right to verbalize and be ugly and mean back. And not once did I ever hear my dad criticize or ostracize them for the cruelty that they were showing him. So that just shows.
No.
Mhm.
Just to clarify here, you mean fellow Americans, American citizens,
Yeah.
American citizens in the hometown where your father's living.
Yeah.
Your father would get recognized in a news publication of some kind, and their response was, well, that's all fake. That didn't really happen. And they would actually write a letter to the editor to that effect.
And speak verbally to media. Yeah. Yes. They, or, I have some publications that were written that people would come down and interview, and there's other veterans who said, well, I injured my hand in the war, and my hand is now I can't numb, I can't work with my hand, it's like paralyzed, but you don't see me going out asking for help or asking for disability, or you don't see me, earning the Medal of Honor for that. I mean, yeah, it was always something. My dad heard a lot. And even to this day, we still hear it. We still hear the hate. We still hear the negativity from people who think that my dad has enough accolades in life. Why do you want to name that after him? Doesn't he have enough schools named after him? Why do you want to name that after him? Doesn't he have enough awards? Yeah, it's really sad. But our family, my dad taught us to just keep going. My dad always told me, Yvette, you're okay. The world's wrong. So that is exactly what I live by every day. When I see hate on social media, if it's in regards to my dad, I'm just like, you have keyboard courage. You can say that on the keyboard because you're not in front of my face or you're not in front of his face, but you can say it behind social media. A lot of people have courage when it comes to social media because they've got that keyboard and they can say whatever they want to say.
The Medal of Honor is not just given out to anybody. I mean,
No.
the requirements to even be considered for one is lengthy and stringent and with multiple layers of validation and due diligence done. And, the President of the United States read the citation. I mean,
Yeah.
what more do you want? And yes, people get hurt in service, some more than others. But the fact of the matter is, when you read the citation, there's no other choice in my mind that, he was more than deserving. And that
Right.
kind of leads me to, where I want to go is you have the book for children about your father's story. Have you ever considered writing a book from your adult perspective about what you just relayed to me?
Yeah.
Because people don't believe that this kind of thing actually happens in this country.
Yes. Yeah, actually I have. And there's other perspectives I want to put into that. I started a WordPress blog, I guess you could say, and I have about 17 different pieces that I've written. And so eventually what I have learned is that other people's, I guess, have said that when they start blogs like that and put writing pieces on there, that they eventually turn it into books. So I have about 17 on there that I believe are worthy of being chapters in a book. But yes, I have thought about that. I've talked about it with my siblings, that I think it would be also neat because out of the 7 grandchildren that my parents have, 3 were really 2 were born when my sister's 2 oldest children were born. So they got to have their grandpa in their lives, but the other 5 did not. And so, I want to put their perspective as well, because they're the next generation who, after we're gone, they're going to have to carry the torch and continue to talk about their grandfather and continue the legacy. But yes, I have. And one day I will see that to fruition. I would love to see a documentary on my dad, and nobody has really approached us on that, which I don't know why. I mean, people have mentioned it, but I think they'd like to see a movie first, which my mom did sell the life rights to my dad's story, so that's kind of in the works, but we don't know how long it's going to take. We're hoping within the next 2 years we'll see something come to that, because that's also a huge question. How is there not a movie about him? I don't know Hollywood standards, but to my understanding, sometimes it does take time.
Wow.
So we're patiently waiting for that, and we have probably within the next 2 years, is what I can say, is God willing, we will see something in that aspect come to the big screen.
You mentioned your siblings.
Mm-hmm.
What's their take on their life with their father and his service and getting the Medal of Honor? I don't know if it's exactly as similar as yours, or do they have a different, perspective in mind or different memories? How do you
But
all work
yeah,
through
I
that?
think they have different memories.
Yeah.
Obviously my brother was 2, we're all like 2-3 years apart. My sister, my brother is very private, like my father, so he doesn't speak too much about, I don't think he likes to speak too much about it, so you probably won't see him. He's not on social media, and he likes the privacy of that aspect. My sister does speak about him, and she has, I think, similar recollections. She remembers a lot more, obviously, than I do, because she was with him a lot longer. And she was born during the time that my father did his May 1968 tour. So, had my dad not lived, my brother and I obviously would not have been born. We were born after that. And that, when I first recognized that, and it was cognizant in my brain that I almost wasn't born, it became very paramount to me that I'm here for a reason, and my purpose now is to help carry my dad's legacy. I was given a gift of life by God and by, obviously, my parents. So I need to honor that and respect that as much as possible. And so that's why I do what I do. I decided to get on social media sites because that's the wave of our future. And so I do have a YouTube channel that I administer. I have a Facebook page on my dad that I administer, Instagram and X, formerly known as Twitter. And I do try to keep the YouTube and Facebook page as current and updated as possible. More on YouTube, more on Facebook than anything.
Sure.
But yeah. So
Well, I'd like to have those links in the Oscar Mike Radio show post about our conversation so people can
yeah,
check all that out. Kind of winding
definitely.
this down. Um, you kind of touched on it before, but just again, what was your father like when he wasn't in army mode, if that makes sense? When he was just being
Yeah.
your dad on a Sunday afternoon, it's Easter or Christmas morning. What was your father like then,
Yeah.
Yvette?
Well, my dad was very religious, and we never missed Sunday Mass. Um, had to be there early, if not on time, and would be honking the horn if you weren't out there in the car. My
15 minutes
dad,
early, Yvette.
yes, definitely. And I'm always fashionably late. So the horn, I'm the middle child. So the horn was always blaring, let's hurry up or I'm going to leave you. And he meant that. When we sat in church, we could not cross our legs. So if I crossed my legs, he would have his hand right there telling me, nudging me, uncross your legs. We've all attended a private Catholic school, so we adhered to never eating meat on Fridays. And my dad was very adamant about not eating meat. Now it's usually typically during the Lent season that you don't eat meat, but my dad was no, it's all year. So we never ate meat on Fridays the whole year. My dad had certain expectations, and that was to respect others, especially your elders. So we did. He was funny, like I said, very witty, very intelligent. He knew about 14 different languages.
Oh, wow.
He could speak them enough to get by in the country that he was in. But this coming from an 8th grade dropout. So he's very inspiring. Let's see. He loved to travel every summer. We went on family vacation. So he was very big on us seeing the world. And of course, it was within the United States. We never traveled outside of the United States, but he wanted us to see different states. And so every year during the summer, that was the highlight, was us traveling. Yeah, he was just an incredible person. What you see on YouTube, on the videos that you see, very charismatic, very uplifting and inspiring and motivational. That is exactly how he was in real life. I could go to him for anything, and he would make me feel really like it was never something that I did. It was just like, they're wrong. Just don't worry about it. And that kind of was his motto in life. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. And one day that children's book will come out, because that's what I wrote about. I do have it sitting on my shelf. Don't worry about it. That's what it's called. And then I have another one, You're Okay, the World's Wrong. So one day those will come out on the shelf. But yeah, he was just very kind and sweet and funny, a jokester. I do remember once, because like I said, I was the middle child and kind of late, and I loved to get my sleep in, and, he'd want to take us to school and be there on time. And I guess I was oversleeping. And so in order to wake me up, he put toothpaste between my toes. And so that was one way that he would try to get me up out of bed. And then he had this 1958, I think, red Chevrolet truck that was, in my mind, just a jalopy and piece of embarrassment. Mind you, now that I'm an adult, it's such a vintage car that I would love to get my hands on. But at the time, when you're 11 years old, that is like the most embarrassing thing that your parent could drive you to school in. And he knew that it embarrassed me to no end, that truck. And so because he knew that, he would come and pick me up from school and honk the horn and go, Yvette, I'm up here. And so embarrassing, but he wanted to prove a point that you don't need to be embarrassed about things. Okay. This is not something you should be embarrassed about.
Well, this is just fantastic. And, if the books come out, I hope you entertain or consider coming back on and telling us about it, because I'm looking forward to reading them when they do come out. So
Absolutely. You do have something to look forward to, if I might say. There is an author by the name of William Sturkey. He wrote a book. It's coming out on June the 17th of 2024, and it's called The Ballad of Roy Benavidez. So that is something for everybody to look forward to. And it digs deep into the lineage of my father, and why, where his family comes from, who they were, and why he ultimately became the person that he became. And then we are reproducing in print his first book that he helped to co-author, called The Three Wars of Roy Benavidez, and that is going to be coming back out in publication soon. It has not been in publication for many years, but it's coming back into publication.
Fantastic, fantastic. Lots to look forward to, and I can't
Yes.
wait to read them. Yvette, again, it's just a real, honor to get to talk with you and learn about the man behind the man. And also, to me, listening to you share with us, it's a reminder that there's still ignorance out there about the military experience. And, if we don't keep these legacies alive, we don't remind people of the cost of what we enjoy here as Americans,
Hmm.
it'll be gone in a generation, no problem. I mean,
It will
so
be. Yeah.
so I really appreciate you doing this. Um, I will have the links to all your stuff in the Oscar Mike Radio show posts. I just want to thank you again. Ladies and gentlemen, the book is Tango Mike Mike by Yvette Benavidez Garcia, about her father, Roy Benavidez, Medal of Honor recipient, U.S. Army. And it's just, this is what makes Oscar Mike Radio going into year 8 just a pleasure. So Yvette, thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Well, again, this is Travis with Oscar Mike Radio. My guest, Yvette Benavidez Garcia. Thank you so much. We're Mission in Flight. We will see you next time. Thank you.
Remember, Honor teaches our mission. We care about it and we do it every day. But I think there are things that just hit you and give you a reason to go on. The theme for our 2024 from Reach Across America is Live with Purpose. It just seemed to fit in with the vows of the REAP, the 10 attributes that we feel represent our United States military. I thought, what a great opportunity to put those two things together and show our kids through how we act some of the things that can make their lives better, their communities better, and by doing that, the country better. For me, Live with Purpose, I think, it's a mindset. Set some guidelines and then go out and purposefully make life different, make a change. It's an opportunity to set an example.
Thank you for listening and watching Oscar Mike Radio, where our active duty service members and veterans are in action and the mission is in flight. Oscar Mike Radio is an oversized load Co-Sinister One production. If you are a veteran or know a veteran who needs help, please dial 988 and press 1 for the Veterans Crisis Line.